I did not cry when my mother-in-law called me a helpless widow in open court. I did not move when her attorney told the judge I had manipulated my dying husband into leaving me the lake house. And I did not look away when she smiled at me from across the aisle, the same cold smile she had worn at his funeral. She thought silence meant weakness. She thought my plain black dress, my cheap folder, and my empty chair beside me meant I had come alone. Then, Judge Elias Marino lifted his eyes from the case file, stared at my name for 3 full seconds, and said, very quietly, "Colonel Whitmore?" The courtroom changed in that instant. Her smile disappeared. Her attorney stopped touching his binders. And I opened the first exhibit my husband had left behind before cancer took his voice. Because Michael knew his mother would come for the house. And he had made sure she would lose it in public. My name is Naomi Whitmore. For 20 years, I served in the United States Army Judge Advocate General's Corps. Most people hear that and imagine paperwork, uniforms, and quiet offices. They do not imagine fraud investigations, witness statements, command hearings, or the kind of courtroom silence that comes right before a witness realizes the truth has already been documented. After I retired, I stopped wearing the rank. I stopped correcting people who called me Mrs. Whitmore instead of Colonel. I planted rosemary by the kitchen window, bought soft sweaters, and learned how to be ordinary. Michael loved that about me. He said I'd spent enough years being strong for strangers. He said our lake house at Laurel Ridge was where I could finally be quiet without being mistaken for empty. The house sat above the water on a slope of pine trees and stone steps. Michael had bought it before we married with money from his own engineering work. Not from his mother, not from a trust, not from the old Lockwood family accounts. He had rebuilt the dock with his own hands. He had painted the blue bedroom twice because I changed my mind halfway through the first color. It was not a mansion, but it was ours. His mother, Vivian Lockwood, hated anything she could not control. To Richmond society, Vivian was elegant. She wore pearls like armor and spoke with the soft authority of a woman who expected obedience before she had to ask for it. She called herself a guardian of family legacy. In private, legacy meant possession. And I had never been one of the possessions she approved of. When Michael introduced me, I was 46. Recently retired, with a grown daughter and a habit of answering questions directly. Vivian looked at me the way a museum curator might look at muddy boots on marble. "A military lawyer," she said, touching the stem of her wine glass. "How practical." Michael squeezed my hand. "She was one of the best," he said. Vivian smiled. "I'm sure she was, but our world is different, dear. Here, people do not win arguments by giving orders." I almost laughed, because orders had never won a case in my life. Evidence did. But I let it pass. Then the cancer came. The months that followed were measured by pill bottles, blankets, appointment cards, and the strange courage of ordinary mornings. Vivian came twice in the first month. The first time, she brought flowers too large for the table and cried only long enough for the hospice nurse to notice. The second time, she waited until Michael was asleep and told me the family would take over major decisions from there. I was rinsing a spoon in the sink. "No," I said. Her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" Michael's decisions are Michael's. Medical, legal, financial. He is competent, and he has made his wishes clear. You have become very comfortable speaking for him. I turned off the water. I speak when he asks me to speak. That is different. From that day forward, Vivian stopped pretending. She called during chemo weeks. She sent emails disguised as concern. She told Michael the lake house belonged with the Lockwood bloodline. She said people would think poorly of him if he left ancestral value to me. Michael laughed the first time he read that phrase. Ancestral value, he said, coughing into a towel. My grandfather would have traded all of it for a decent fishing boat. But the calls kept coming. One night, after treatment left him pale and shaking, I found him at the kitchen table with his laptop open. Naomi, he said, if I ask you to help me prepare something, will you promise not to argue? That depends on whether it is foolish. It is the opposite of foolish. He wanted a sworn statement. Not a sentimental letter, not a goodbye. A legal record. 8 months before he died. Michael Whitmore signed a notarized statement of testamentary intent and protection of separate property. It declared that the Laurel Ridge Lake House belonged to him personally, that he wished it to pass solely to me, that no undue influence had occurred, and that he anticipated pressure from his mother regarding the property. I did not draft it for him. He used an independent estate attorney, Charles Merritt, whom Vivian had never met and could not intimidate. Michael met with him privately. A physician signed a competency letter the same week. Copies were placed in 3 locations. One with the attorney. One in our safe. One in a blue folder marked boat insurance, because Michael knew Vivian would never look anywhere practical. That document became Exhibit D, but it was not the only thing he left behind. Michael died on a Thursday morning in October. The lake outside our bedroom window was still. My daughter, Emily, had driven in from Charlottesville the night before, and she sat on the edge of the bed, holding the hand that had taught her how to cast a fishing line and check the oil in her first car. Vivian arrived 2 hours after he passed. Not 20 minutes into standing in my living room, she asked where the property documents were. Emily's head snapped up. I put one hand on my daughter's shoulder. Not today, I said. Vivian looked at Michael's body, then at me, as if both were obstacles in a hallway. There are responsibilities after death. Naomi, sentiment cannot be allowed to create disorder. That was the first time Emily saw the whole of her grandmother's cruelty, without velvet over it. Get out, my daughter said. Vivian stared at her. Young lady, get out of my mother's house. Vivian left with the expression of a woman who had just found a new name to add to a list. 3 weeks later, she filed a petition challenging the estate. Her claim was simple on paper and vicious underneath. She alleged that I had isolated Michael during his illness, manipulated him while he was medically vulnerable, and coerced him into leaving me the lake house. She asked the court to freeze the property and return it to the Lockwood Family Trust. The petition described me as financially dependent. It described me as emotionally unstable. It described me as a woman who had exercised undue influence over a dying man. I spent the next month preparing the way I had prepared for military courts. Not angrily, carefully. I made a timeline. Michael's diagnosis, competency evaluation, estate meetings, medication changes, hospital admissions, Vivian's visits, Vivian's emails, Vivian's calls, Michael's responses. Every date had a source. Every claim had a document. Every document had a backup. I obtained certified medical records showing Michael's decision-making capacity. I organized emails where Michael told his mother, in writing, to stop pressuring him about the house. I printed text messages where Vivian referred to the property as ours, and Michael replied, "No, Mother, it is mine, and I am leaving it to Naomi." Then I found the audio files. Michael had recorded 3 calls on his own phone and saved them in a folder labeled "For Naomi if needed." Before using them, I verified that they had been legally recorded and could be offered with proper foundation. The first recording was 12 minutes long. Vivian's voice came through clean and cold. "You are not thinking clearly, Michael. Illness makes people cling to whoever is closest. Naomi has taken advantage of proximity." Michael sounded tired. "Do not speak about my wife that way. She is not family in the way I mean family. She is my wife. She is a second marriage and a former soldier with no understanding of legacy." There was a long pause. Then Michael said, "If you bring this up again during treatment week, I will restrict hospital visits." Vivian's reply became Exhibit F. "You would punish your own mother over a house?" "No," Michael said. "I would protect my wife from harassment while I am dying." The courthouse stood in downtown Richmond. All stone steps and old wood. The kind of building that made ordinary disputes feel historic before anyone spoke. Vivian arrived with an entourage. Preston Vale walked at her right shoulder with a leather trial bag. Behind them came 2 junior attorneys, a paralegal, and Vivian's younger brother. Vivian wore navy silk and diamonds small enough to seem tasteful, but expensive enough to be noticed. I arrived alone. I wore a plain charcoal dress, low heels, and Michael's wedding ring on a chain beneath my collar. My evidence fit in one black case. That seemed to please Vivian. When we entered the courtroom, she leaned close enough for only me to hear. "Naomi, this does not have to be humiliating." I looked at her. "No," I said. "It does not." She misunderstood the answer and smiled. Judge Elias Moreno entered at 9 sharp. He was in his late 60s, with silver hair, heavy brows, and the attentive stillness of a man who had spent his life separating noise from meaning. I knew from public records that he had served in the Navy Reserve early in his career. I did not know whether he would remember me. I hoped he would not. I wanted the case decided on evidence, not reputation. Preston began with theater. He described Vivian as a grieving mother, seeking only to preserve her son's true wishes. He spoke of vulnerability, isolation, emotional dependency, and a late-life marriage that had allegedly changed Michael's relationship with his family. He never called me Colonel. He called me Mrs. Whitmore. He called me the surviving spouse. Once, with polished sympathy, he called me a woman overwhelmed by loss. Vivian dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. No tears touched the fabric. Then Judge Moreno looked down at the respondent information sheet. His eyes stopped. He looked up at me. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, then paused. "Your full name is Naomi Elise Whitmore?" "Yes, Your Honor." He studied me for another second. "Formerly Colonel Naomi Whitmore, United States Army Judge Advocate General's Corps?" The room went still. Preston's head turned halfway toward me. Vivian's handkerchief froze near her cheek. I stood. "Yes, Your Honor," retired. Judge Moreno leaned back slowly. "I thought so. You prosecuted the Harlan procurement fraud case, did you not?" "Yes, Your Honor." I was on reserve duty when parts of that record crossed my desk. His voice became more precise. "You may proceed when appropriate, Colonel." He did not salute. A courtroom was not a parade ground. But the word Colonel struck harder than any salute could have. Vivian looked at me as if I had taken off a mask. I had not. She had simply never bothered to see the face underneath. After the judge recognized my old rank, Preston Vale tried to pretend nothing had changed. He still spoke as if I were a grieving woman who could be cornered with legal language. He still tried to turn Michael's illness into suspicion and Vivian's greed into concern. So I let him talk. Then I began with the only thing that mattered. Documents. Not feelings, not family reputation, not old money wrapped in pearls and expensive manners. Documents, dates, signatures, medical records, and the voice of the man they were all pretending to protect. I stood with the notarized statement in my hand. Your Honor, I move to admit Respondent's Exhibit D, Statement of Testamentary Intent and Protection of Separate Property, executed by Michael Whitmore 8 months before his death. Preston objected on relevance, authenticity, and prejudice. Judge Moreno allowed testimony from Charles Merritt, the estate attorney, by video. Mr. Merritt confirmed Michael had contacted him independently. He confirmed I had not been present for the private meetings. He confirmed Michael had specifically raised concern that Vivian Lockwood would attempt to challenge the estate. And did Mr. Whitmore appear confused? I asked. No. Did he appear pressured by me? No. Did he indicate why he wanted the lake house to pass to me? Mister? Merritt adjusted his glasses. Yes. He said it was the home where he had been happiest. He said Mrs. Whitmore had cared for him without asking what she would receive. He said he wanted her to have peace after he was gone. For the first time that morning, I had to look down. Not because I was weak. Because grief has a way of walking into the room even when you lock the door. Judge Moreno admitted Exhibit D. Vivian's posture changed. Not much. People like Vivian rarely collapse in public. But her shoulders stiffened, and her fingers stopped moving over the pearls at her throat. She had come to court believing my silence meant I had nothing. Now she understood my silence had been storage. The final evidence was the audio. I did not want to play it. There are victories that still feel like a second funeral. But Vivian's petition accused me of stealing Michael's voice, so I gave his voice back to the room. The recording played through the courtroom speakers. Vivian's voice, "You are not thinking clearly, Michael." Michael's voice, thin but steady, "I am thinking more clearly than I ever have." Vivian, "That house should stay with your name." Michael, "Naomi is my name. She took it when she married me, and she honored it better than most people born into yours." Someone behind me inhaled sharply. Emily had come after all. I had not known she was there until that sound. The second recording was shorter. Vivian threatened to challenge the will if Michael did not correct the mistake before it became permanent. Michael replied, "If you turn my death into a lawsuit against my wife, the lawsuit will tell people more about you than about her." That sentence sat in the air like judgment. When the recording ended, Judge Moreno removed his glasses. "Mrs. Lockwood," he said, "did you make these calls?" Vivian's voice had become very small. "I was trying to protect my family." "From whom?" She looked at me. I looked back. No one spoke. That silence was the answer. Preston attempted damage control in closing. He argued that grief makes people say regrettable things. He argued that a mother's concern can be misinterpreted. He argued that Michael's illness created vulnerability even if competency remained intact. He did what good lawyers do with bad facts. He tried to make fog. Then I stood. I did not raise my voice. Your Honor, I have spent much of my professional life around people who confused pressure with truth. Pressure can produce signatures. Pressure can produce silence. Pressure can produce fear. But in this case, the pressure did not come from me. I turned one page. Michael Whitmore met privately with counsel. He obtained a competency assessment. He signed a notarized statement anticipating this exact challenge. He preserved emails and recordings because he knew the petitioner would attempt to recast his wishes after his death. Vivian stared at the table. The petitioner has described me as controlling because I was present, but presence is not coercion. Care is not manipulation. Sitting through chemotherapy is not undue influence. Holding a basin at 3 a.m. is not a legal strategy. My voice almost broke there, but only almost. This case was never about protecting Michael. It was about owning him, his name, his property, his memory, his final decision. He spent his last strength making sure the truth would outlive him. I asked the court to honor that truth. I sat down. Judge Moreno took 20 minutes. During that time, Vivian did not look at me. Emily touched my shoulder from the row behind me, and I covered her hand with mine. When the judge returned, everyone stood. The petition was dismissed. The court found insufficient evidence of undue influence. The court found substantial evidence that Michael Whitmore acted knowingly, voluntarily, and with independent legal guidance. The Laurel Ridge Lake House would remain mine according to the estate documents. Then Judge Moreno continued. The court is also deeply troubled by communications introduced into evidence suggesting repeated pressure placed on a seriously ill man regarding property disposition. While this proceeding is civil in nature, the record will reflect the court's concern. Vivian closed her eyes. That was the public collapse of power. Not shouting, not handcuffs, not a dramatic arrest. Just a judge placing the truth into the record where expensive manners could not erase it. When the courtroom emptied, Vivian remained seated. Finally, she spoke. I lost my son. I turned back. For the first time, she sounded old. I know, I said. You took the only thing I had left of him? No, Vivian. You tried to turn the only thing he left me into proof that I did not deserve him. Her face tightened, then cracked in a way that was almost human. What happens now? I could have said many things. I could have asked for sanctions. I could have pursued a separate civil claim. I could have made her remaining year very expensive. But Michael's voice was still in my mind. The lawsuit will tell people more about you than about her. It ends, I said. The house is mine. The record stands. I will not ask for anything more unless you force me to. She looked confused, as if mercy were a language she had never learned. Why? Because punishment can change behavior, I said, but restraint reveals character. Then I left her there with that. Outside the courthouse, Emily asked me why I'd not asked the judge for sanctions, damages, or criminal referrals. I looked back at the stone building and thought of Michael's recorded voice. If she turns my death into a lawsuit, he had said, the lawsuit will tell people more about her than about you. It already did. I told my daughter. The newspapers wrote about the ruling for a few days. Vivian's invitations grew quiet. Her charity board stopped calling. People who once leaned toward her at dinners began stepping carefully around her name. I did not celebrate that. I went home. The lake house was still there, standing above the water in the evening light. Michael's blue mug still sat by the sink. His jacket still hung behind the door. The trial was over, but grief remained. Emily made tea while I opened the windows. Dad knew you would win, she said softly. I shook my head. No, he knew I would stand. That was what people like Vivian never understood. Strength is not always loud. Sometimes strength is answering discovery requests at midnight while your heart is breaking. Sometimes it is letting people underestimate you because correcting them would waste time. Sometimes it is walking into court alone because the person you loved left enough truth behind to stand beside you. A month later, Vivian sent a photograph with no return address. It showed Michael as a boy on the old dock, holding a fish too small to brag about, smiling like the whole lake belonged to Summer. There was a note in her handwriting. "I found this in his room. He looks happy there." No apology. No explanation. Just the first true thing she had given me. I placed the photograph on the mantel, not because Vivian had earned forgiveness, but because Michael deserved to be remembered whole. Justice was my husband's final wish, surviving the people who tried to rewrite him. Justice was my daughter seeing that dignity can hold its ground without shouting. Justice was an old courtroom falling silent when the judge said "Colonel," and everyone realized they had mistaken quiet for weakness. Vivian wanted the court to believe I had influenced Michael. She was right about one thing. I had influenced him by staying, by telling the truth, by loving him without asking what his death would leave me. And he influenced me by proving that even at the end, when his body failed and his voice weakened, his honor did not. The lake house still stands above the water. Michael's name is spoken there with love, not ownership. And when the world tried to reduce me to a helpless widow, the truth stood up first. Then I did